Hey there, economic warriors. It's your host, the boss of economics world, here to slice through the government's economic baloney like a hot knife through taxpayer-funded butter. Today, we're diving headfirst into the latest Trump tariff circus, a masterclass in economic mismanagement that's got markets quaking, consumers sweating, and central bankers popping in tassets like candy. Buckle up, folks, because this is gonna be a wild ride through the government's self-inflicted recession express. And as always, we're here to expose the clowns running the circus and show you how their policies are tanking your wallet, your job, and your future. Let's set the stage, shall we? President Donald Trump, the self-proclaimed tariff man, is back at it, waving his executive pen like a magician's wand, threatening to slap higher tariffs on everyone from Japan to Cambodia. This week, he unleashed a barrage of letters, yes, letters, because apparently, we're living in the 19th century, announcing plans to impose 25% levies on goods from Japan and South Korea, 30% on South Africa, and up to 40% on Laos and Myanmar. And if that wasn't enough, he's teasing more negotiations, dangling an August 1, 2025, deadline that he admits is not 100% firm. Oh, and don't forget the cherry on top, an executive order delaying these so-called reciprocal tariffs by 3 weeks, just to keep everyone guessing. Sounds like a bad reality TV show, right? But here's the kicker, this isn't just theater, it's a policy train wreck that's already roiling markets and threatening to plunge the global economy into chaos. And who's to blame? You guessed it, the government, with its reckless, shoot-from-the-hip approach to trade policy. But before we dive into the gory details, let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture, because folks, this isn't just about tariffs, it's about a government that's hell-bent on driving the economy off a cliff, all while pretending it's winning. First things first, let's debunk the biggest lie Trump and his cronies are peddling, the idea that foreign countries pay these tariffs. Spoiler alert, they don't. According to the American Action Forum, U.S. importers, your local businesses, retailers, and manufacturers, are the ones footing the bill, to the tune of over $135 billion since Trump's trade war began in 2018. And guess what? Those costs get passed on to you, the consumer, in the form of higher prices. The National Retail Federation estimates that Trump's latest tariff threats could add $78 billion in annual costs to U.S. households, equivalent to a $900 tax hike per family. Take Japan and South Korea, for example, two of our closest allies and major exporters of cars and electronics. Trump's threatened 25% tariffs on their goods will jack up the price of your next Toyota or Samsung phone. And don't think this is just about luxury goods, Bloomberg Economics projects that if these tariffs go through, inflation could spike by 1.5 percentage points, pushing the consumer price index to levels not seen since the post-COVID recovery. Meanwhile, the Federal Reserve, already grappling with sticky inflation, is stuck in a bind. Do they raise interest rates to cool prices, risking a recession, or do they sit on their hands and let inflation run wild? Either way, the government's tariff tantrum is pouring fuel on the fire. And here's the kicker, Trump's own Treasury Department reported in July 2025 that the U.S. trade deficit, which he claims these tariffs will fix, actually widened by 7% in the first half of 2025, hitting $1.2 trillion. So much for winning on trade. The government's obsession with tariffs is nothing more than a tax on Americans, disguised as tough guy posturing. And who's paying the price? You, me, and every hardworking family trying to make ends meet. Now, let's talk about the markets, because folks, this is where the rubber meets the road. Trump's tariff threats are like a game of economic Russian roulette, and the markets are the ones sweating bullets. Just this week, the S&P 500 and Nasdaq 100 both dropped 0.8% after Trump's announcement, erasing gains from last week's rally. Japanese automakers like Toyota and Honda saw their American depository receipts tank by over 4%. And the US dollar? It's surging, hitting its highest level in over a week, which sounds great until you realize it makes US exports more expensive, further hammering our trade balance. But here's the real problem, uncertainty. Bloomberg Economics' US Trade Uncertainty Index is still sky high, even after coming off its April 2025 peak. Why? Because Trump's trade policy is a chaotic mess of threats, delays, and backroom deals. One day, he's slapping 40% tariffs on Myanmar, the next, he's teasing a deal with India. Businesses can't plan, investors can't invest, and central bankers can't predict what's coming next. Just look at the Federal Reserve. Chairman Jerome Powell has refused to cut rates in 2025, despite Trump's Twitter tantrums, because he's terrified that tariff-driven price hikes could spiral into runaway inflation. And let's not forget the ripple effects. South Korea's won, Japan's yen, and South Africa's rand all fell over 1% against the dollar this week, signaling global market jitters. Emerging markets, already battered by a strong dollar and rising U.S. interest rates, are bracing for capital outflows as investors flee to safer assets. The International Monetary Fund warned in its July 2025 World Economic Outlook that global growth could slow to 2.8% in 2026, its lowest level in a decade, if Trump's tariffs trigger a full-blown trade war. But hey, at least the government can claim it's tough on trade, right? Wrong, this is economic malpractice, plain and simple. Zooming out further, let's talk about the geopolitical mess Trump's tariffs are creating. Japan and South Korea, two of America's closest allies, are now in the crosshairs, facing 25% tariffs on their exports. Why? According to White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, it's the president's prerogative. Translation, there's no strategy here, just Trump's whims. Meanwhile, South Korea's new President Lee Jae-myung, who took office just a month ago, and Japan's Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba, facing upper house elections, are both in no position to offer concessions without risking political suicide at home. So, what does Trump do? He threatens them anyway, alienating allies at a time when the US needs all the friends it can get to counter China's growing influence in Asia. Speaking of China, Trump's claiming victory with a trade truce, but let's call it what it is, a surrender. After tariffs on Chinese goods soared to 145% in 2024, Beijing retaliated by slashing U.S. agricultural exports, costing American farmers $27 billion in lost revenue, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Now, Trump's touting a deal that merely eases export controls on key supplies, while China continues to dominate global supply chains. And don't even get me started on the BRICS nations. Trump's threat to slap an extra 10% levy on any country aligning with BRICS is a direct attack on emerging markets like Brazil and India, further isolating the U.S. on the global stage. Meanwhile, smaller nations like Myanmar, Laos, and Cambodia, already struggling with political instability and poverty, are getting crushed under 40% tariffs, despite having minimal trade with the U.S. Take Myanmar, for instance. U.S. imports from the country totaled just $656 million in 2024, according to the U.S. Trade Representative. So why target them? Because it's easy, and it makes Trump look tough. But here's the reality, this isn't strength, it's weakness. It's a government so desperate to distract from its domestic failures that it's picking fights with countries that can't fight back, all while alienating the allies we need to tackle real global challenges. Now, let's connect the dots, because folks, this is where it all comes together. Trump's tariffs, combined with his $3.4 trillion tax cut and spending package passed last week, are a recipe for economic disaster. The Congressional Budget Office warned in June 2025 that the U.S. federal deficit could hit $2.6 trillion by the end of the year, its highest level since World War II. And how does Trump plan to pay for it? By filling the Treasury's coffers with tariff revenue, of course. But here's the problem, tariffs aren't a magic money tree. They're a tax on American businesses and consumers, and they're killing the very economic growth Trump claims to champion. Just look at the data. Bloomberg Economics estimates that if Trump's reciprocal tariffs are fully implemented, average duties on U.S. imports could climb to 20%, up from less than 3% before his inauguration. That's a massive shock to an economy already grappling with high inflation, rising interest rates, and slowing growth. The Conference Board's leading economic index has been flashing recession warnings for 6 straight months, and the latest GDP Now estimate from the Atlanta Fed projects U.S. growth at just 1.2% for Q3 2025, its lowest level in 2 years. And let's not forget the Federal Reserve, which is caught between a rock and a hard place. With inflation already running at 4.3%, well above the Fed's 2% target, Powell has no choice but to keep interest rates elevated, even as Trump's tariffs threaten to push prices higher. Torsten Slok, chief economist at Apollo Global Management, warned this week that the bottom line is that we should see inflation move higher over the coming months, thanks to the toxic cocktail of tariffs, oil prices, and immigration restrictions. But hey, at least Trump can claim he's draining the swamp, right? Wrong, this is a government drowning in its own incompetence, and it's taking the economy down with it. So, what's the real story here, folks? It's not about Japan, South Korea, or even China. It's about a government that's lost the plot, obsessed with short-term political wins at the expense of long-term economic stability. Trump's tariffs are just the latest chapter in a saga of economic mismanagement that's been years in the making. From ballooning deficits to botched trade deals, this administration has proven time and again that it's more interested in headlines than results. And who pays the price? You, the taxpayer, the consumer, the worker, the investor, everyone except the clowns running the show. But here's the good news, economic warriors, you don't have to sit back and take it. It's time to call out the government's economic malpractice for what it is and demand real solutions. Trade isn't the enemy, bad policy is. Instead of slapping tariffs on our allies, we should be investing in infrastructure, education, and innovation to make America truly competitive. Instead of picking fights with the world, we should be leading it. And instead of pretending that tariffs will fix our problems, we should be fixing the government's broken approach to economic management. Alright, folks, that's all for today's episode of Boss Economics World. If you're as fed up as I am with the government's economic clown show, smash that like button, share this video with your friends, and leave a comment below telling us how Trump's tariffs are hitting your wallet. And don't forget to subscribe for more hard-hitting economic truth bombs, because here at Boss Economics World, we're not just watching the circus, we're calling out the clowns. Until next time, stay sharp, stay savvy, and keep fighting the good fight.